Hello, I'm Mark DeLuzio. Over the past century, our constitutional republic, grounded in the rule of law, has been transformed into a tyrannical democracy, orchestrated by unelected bureaucrats and globalists. The Constitution is now treated as a suggestion, not the law of the land. Welcome to the Constitution Solution, one podcast under God.
Hi, I'm Mark's co-host, Suzette Lawrence. Our intention is to explore the Constitution and discuss how our freedoms and constitutional rights are violated by those very politicians who took an oath on the Bible to uphold it. Learn how the Constitution is the solution to our country's problems. What do we need to do to restore our inalienable and enumerated rights? Class begins now.
Welcome to episode 33. Mark DeLuzio here with Suzette Lawrence. Suzette, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm really excited about this podcast because I was confused about the role of the vice president. I think many of us are. And I wanted to look into that, like to see what is, in this case, what is her role? What is she constitutionally obligated to do? Now, keeping in mind that the Constitution is the law of the land. So it's not suggested that she do these things. These are her duties and responsibilities as the second highest person in the executive branch. Mm-hmm. So that's so that got me really interested. And
I don't think a lot of people know really what the vice president's supposed to do. And so anyway, if you're keeping score, this is episode 33. We're very simply calling this the role of the vice president. And I know, Suzette, you did a lot of work on this. And we're going to talk about the role as the Constitution dictates, and also talk about the role of the vice president in what we call the 25th Amendment, which we'll get to a little bit later on in this episode. So let me turn it back to you and tell us what you know about the vice president that's legal.
Okay. Okay, I will.
So we don't get into any defamation suits, you know.
Oh no, I'm going to be very good. So the vice president of the United States earns about, we'll start there. She's selected, or he is selected is supposed to be selected by the president. Mm-hmm. We all, when you look into this, you start learning about the backroom deals and some of the horrible things that have happened, and why sometimes the president and the vice president are really adversarial, right. And so it's really nice when the president elect selects his VP, as opposed to having this person foisted upon them. So the role of the vice president, now this is the second highest power position mm-hmm. in the executive branch. Mm-hmm. The vice president earns about $230,000 a year. The vice president gets to live at the the Naval Observatory. They have a beautiful home there. They have protection, Secret Service. They're driven around. Some of these career politicians don't know how to drive because they've been driven on our dime for so long. They don't go to the grocery store.
By the way, Suzette, the Naval Observatory, if people haven't been to Washington, it's a building adjacent to the White House, right next door, really. But yet, many people might think that the vice president lives in the White House, and they don't. They live in the Naval Observatory, and in some sense, it's actually it's a beautiful building. And the office of the vice president, I've seen it on. I haven't been there, but I've been to the Oval Office. But in some sense, the office is even nicer than the Oval Office. So anyway, wow. But okay.
So the vice president has access to Air Force too. So right. They have their own private jet, and they can fly around with whomever really they want.
And again, in the spirit of educating, I want to make sure, again, there's a little tidbit for people to know. Whatever plane the president flies on is known as Air Force One. Okay, there's a designated plane that he uses, It says United States of America on it and all that. That's 747, I think. But and whatever plane the vice president flies on is known as Air Force Two. Although she has, Kamala in this case, a designated plane she always uses. But if she was going to take a puddle jumper to some island to go fishing, that plane would be known as Air Force Two. Okay, and this is all a Secret Service thing and all that. That's one of it's probably inconsequential to this discussion, but I think I like these little tidbits
Yeah,
of what makes up our government. So anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
not at I think that's very interesting, actually.
Yeah.
So the vice president, her primary role is in the as stated in the Constitution, and there she's mentioned there are two articles in the
Yeah.
Constitution where the vice president is mentioned, and there are three amendments: the 12th, 20th, and the 25th,
Hmm.
that direct her responsibilities. Now, this isn't a suggestion, and this is something, Mark, that you brought up that I don't think a lot of people realize, that many people in the government that we have elected and that have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution simply choose not to.
Yep.
It's a formality. And they're not held accountable. Now, the vice president, just like the president, can be impeached.
Hmm.
That there's a process for that that would involve the Congress, of course. But let's stick with just what their jobs are. So, Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution names the vice president as the president of the Senate. That means that at any given time, while the vice president cannot argue a position, they can attend the Senate. And that's why you'll always see the vice president when like during the State of the Union, the vice president is sitting behind
Right.
the president. They are the president of the Senate. They're called on if there's a tie.
Hmm.
So they will cast the deciding vote, but they can sit in on what's happening in the Senate anytime they want,
That's
because
right.
they are in fact the president of the Senate.
And again, just to kind of not re-educate, but educate people out there, there are there are 100 senators, 50
Yeah.
from each state. Okay. I'm sorry, two from each state. And so there could be a 50-50 tie, which to
Mm-hmm.
your point is where the vice president would come in and break that tie. Now that happened with Al Gore when they raised taxes on they taxed Social Security, and people seem to forget they took the low income rate tax rate from 10% to 15%. Al Gore cast that deciding vote. Everybody said, well, geez, it only went up 5%. No, it didn't. It went up 50%. 10% of your income to 15% of your income is a 50% increase in your taxes. Bill Clinton did that with Al Gore's help when he actually broke the vote. Kamala Harris has voted on all these crazy spending bills that have been going on. She was a tying vote. So, uh, the vice president does have that power to break those ties, and it's come into play so many times in our history.
And yes. So, and we remember, well, we'll talk, we'll come back to Al Gore a little later.
Do
So,
we have to?
well, it's a good example.
Look, I know he invented the internet, okay, um, but
So,
we can, okay, we'll come back. Okay.
oh, you're too funny. So Article 2, Section 1 and 4 basically are standard stuff. The vice president serves 4 years, the same length as the president.
Right.
Um, and the vice president, the president, the vice president, and all civil officers. Now, this is what I wanted to add. What's a civil officer? I'm guessing those are cabinet members or people that have not been elected but appointed. Maybe they've been confirmed through the Senate and congressional hearings, but all of these people.
It's a good question. I don't even know if the title of cabinet members, we should do a little history on that, is outlined in the Constitution.
We'll
we've
have to
created all
look.
these.
Yeah, I didn't see it,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and
yeah.
and I think we're all curious, because we know, unfortunately, that our president is not well. And I mean, he's told us that. We've watched it. You don't need to be you can see that he's having problems. So you have to wonder who's running the country.
No,
It's
I don't wonder that. I know exactly who's running the country. Anyway,
so let me
by
just
the way,
wait.
most of the cabinet members are heads of these agencies, these major agencies anyway, not every agency, because we have hundreds of agencies in the government right now, most of which are unconstitutional. One of the things I want to point out here, Suzette, is if you've been following along with us all along on this podcast, we talked about Article 1 being the article of the legislative branch, which dictates Congress and Senate. Article 2 is the executive branch, which is the president. And Article 3 is the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. So, why is the vice president being mentioned in Article 1? Well, simply because the vice president is the president of the Senate, which is a part of the legislative branch. So that's why it's mentioned in Article 1, and also, as you said, Susan, in Article 2 as well, which is the executive branch. So,
Thank you. Um, the vice president, as we said, serves for 4 years,
right.
along with the president and the other officers of the executive branch. And all of them can be removed from office on impeachment if they're convicted of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, even the hint, like I'm thinking of when President Nixon resigned, okay, even the hint of impropriety caused him to resign because he didn't want the focus to be on something that had happened in this case, the Watergate break-in,
Right.
which is like small potatoes when you think of some of the other crimes that we're aware of since that time. But even he respected the Constitution and the office of the president so much that President Nixon resigned.
Mm-hmm.
Who took his place? Who was his VP? Do you
Well,
remember?
VP, he got indicted. That was Agnew, Spiro Agnew. But who took his place was Gerald Ford.
Exactly. Who
Yeah.
came from the Senate, right? I mean,
No, he came
that was
from the Congress out of Michigan. He came from the Congress, and he ended up pardoning when he became president. He pardoned Nixon, and he did it for the spirit of the country, not to drag the country through more turmoil in this Watergate thing. But you're right about that, because Watergate, compared to what's been going on with the Russia Gate, the Spygate, the tapping of Trump, the Trump Tower, Watergate is not. I can't even call it a dime store robbery compared to what these people are doing today. Not
oh,
even close.
Uranium One. Let's not forget
Yep.
Uranium One pay to play. Supplying Russia with
It's
our
unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But everybody has, I know I'm deviating here a little bit, but everybody kind of has something on somebody in Washington. And if you don't believe me, look what happened to Mayor Adams in New York City when he started pushing back on Kamala and the border and all that, because his people were saying, "Hey, it's costing us $5 billion of our money a year to house all these people in four-star hotels." He starts pushing back. All of a sudden, he gets indicted by the Justice Department. Isn't that amazing? And I'm not here advocating for him whether he's innocent or guilty. My guess, if I had a guess, he's guilty. But why now? And why did they all of a sudden pick him? Because he started pushing it back against the machine. Okay, that's actually what happened with Mr. Mayor Adams, and and uh, and so when you start looking at this impeachment thing, and looking at what Nixon did, Nixon, I do believe, I agree with you, did it not to put us through any more turmoil as a country. These people don't give a rat's ass about that stuff. They don't care. And if you
no.
step out of line, not only will you get indicted like they did with Trump, and like they're doing with Steve Bannon and all these other people that are on these
Julian Assange,
Julian
who's not
Assange.
even
I mean, you go down the list,
American,
right? And
he's
and
Australian. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, but he's not even an American. He's an Australian. So when I often will refer to Americans versus globalists as opposed to Republicans versus Democrats. And I know that a lot of people that are Democrats don't understand that they're actually globalists, because the globalist agenda is I mean, even the phrases like build back better, that
it's
came from
it's
a
it's very
really
clear. It's very
forum.
clear.
Yeah,
It's very
so
clear.
there's no
And I was with Carrie Lake a couple weeks ago, and she mentioned this, and I thought it was a really good insight. When Kamala says, uh, "I'm burdened by the past," she's basically saying, "Forget history, forget our Constitution. Okay, we're going to
Kamala
set a new agenda."
at Eric Weinstein, who is it,
Yep,
yeah, I think Eric Weinstein, brilliant
yep,
professor actually that got canceled by the Democrats. He's a liberal Democrat.
yep.
He was explaining that that was translated directly from Marx.
It
And
was,
I
yeah, it was, and
actually,
you
yeah,
keep you
so
keep
he is
repeating it over and over again. It becomes common fare, right? Anyway, I know we're getting a little off track here, but uh,
okay.
but the
So
vice president, yes.
so
And
now
in this
we're
case, Nixon stepped down, and Agnew couldn't take over. They indicted him, and they put um,
Gerald
they
Ford.
selected Gerald Ford in office without anybody voting for him either. But okay, go ahead.
So so then we go move on to the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment was proposed. It used to be that whoever came in second in the presidential race was made vice president. And this was didn't you can see where the problems might be,
Right.
and how are these two people that have been at each other through a campaign now going to work together? Some people can do that. We see it now with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and President Trump, that they are able to find common ground, which I love that, because the brain trust in the country is dispersed among so many. So to be able to bring other people in that are expert in an area, I think is really powerful. And, when they have talked about this, Bobby Kennedy was very clear that there were things he didn't agree with, but that he and the president did agree on so much that he was happy to come in and be part of the transition team,
Yep.
because he knew how to he knew the players, right? I mean, the guy's had 40 years of successful the most successful environmental law practice in the country. He's won all of his cases. So it's a really, I think, like, that kind of thing is really powerful. And in 1803, the 12th Amendment was proposed that the vice president would be elected, so that he would come in with the president, so that they would be a team. You'd be like we do today. I'm pretty sure that that's how that
We're
worked.
voting for the team. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So like, you want to have, when you look at a presidential candidate and their vice president is really weak, that has often, from a political standpoint, been described as insurance. Because if you have a vice president that's so awful, that almost ensures the success of the president, because he's not going to get much opposition, right? Does that make sense? Am I?
No, it does. No, it does. And it's interesting, the JD Vance debate the other night where he crushed his opponent there, the Timmy boy. Um, he actually crushed him. Uh, I think that most VP debates don't have any impact on the election. Just like when Dan Quayle got crushed by Lloyd Benson when he said, "John Kennedy, I knew John Kennedy. John Kennedy was a friend of mine. Sir, you know John Kennedy." And that just demolished Quayle at that debate. But Bush went on to win. Okay. So, so this debate with the other night with JD Vance, to me, had all to do with positioning him for 2028. That's what that was about. Okay.
Oh, well,
And
he did a great job.
yeah,
He had a big
yeah.
success if that was his intent. What I'm wondering in that debate, now I did hear, I couldn't watch it. I really couldn't. I tried to watch it, but it was just so. unfair, and it wasn't really a debate. So, but JD, I think the thing I liked about him was he held up, he kept his cool, he stayed on point, and he didn't let them talk over him, which I think even when they turned off his mic, he kept, he stopped then. But there were two things that happened in that debate that just made me crazy. One was the vice presidential nominee has, or he wasn't really a nominee, the selection of the vice president for Kamala Harris, called himself a knucklehead. Now, many of us that have followed his career would agree with that, but he called himself that. So that's kind of scary. And then he also made some reference. I don't know, were you able to watch the debate, Mark?
I watched parts of it.
Did you see the part where he talked about being friends with a school shooter?
No, I didn't. But if he did say he was a knucklehead, it's probably one of the first things I heard him say that was true.
I know. The guy, I mean, he's a
The
liar.
guy's a habitual liar. He's just a habitual liar, and
He is.
but he fits right in with the rest of the crowd. So, but well, okay. So in 1803, they actually changed that so that you've got a team now instead of individual elections or the number two guy becoming, the president. What about the 20th Amendment? What's that? What's that all about?
So the 20th Amendment is says the term ends for the president ends on, and the vice president, they end together on January 20th at high noon. And we know that, the president, while they're at the inauguration, the White House gets shifted over. I don't know how they do that move.
Right.
But that's pretty amazing. And that, and this is section 2, that Congress has to assemble at least once a year. This was, it's one of those really sweet things. Then the 24th Amendment says that was proposed in 1962 and ratified in 1964 after the assassination. Do I get to say who killed John F. Kennedy?
We don't know yet. We still don't know.
The president of that after President Kennedy was assassinated, we know that LBJ was promoted to president, but there wasn't that clear of a step-by-step how this is done and who does it. And that's what the 24th Amendment is all about. And it lays it out so there's no question about it. Now, this is the amendment that many of us have been waiting for the vice president to enact. And this is the responsibility of the vice president, is to essentially remove the president from office if he's unable.
You're talking about the 25th Amendment now, right?
Yes, the 25th Amendment.
Okay.
The 25th Amendment says if the president is removed from office or if he dies or resigns, the VP will become president. That's section 1. Section 2, wherever there's a vacancy in the office of the VP, the president will nominate a vice president who will take office after a majority vote of the House. Right. The third is whenever the president transmits to whenever the president transmits to the vice president, and they call it pro tempore, which is like for a specific amount of time, the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives can declare that he is unable to discharge his duties. Now, this is a very serious thing. This is the vice president, because the vice president is, as Vice President Harris has told us all the time, that she's with Joe Biden every day, and how sharp he was and how clever he was and how, just amazing his performance was, especially at his age. So she told us that up until she didn't. It was literally, 1 week he was the greatest guy. Then he got on national television and did a debate with President Trump. And I mean, even with confirmation bias, it was, you look at all these different people that finally realized they couldn't fool us anymore. I don't know. I think that they all knew. I mean, how do you not know? I knew looking at him. I don't, you don't have
Well,
to
well,
be.
you don't have to be a doctor, and the other thing too, this is along the same time that she told us the economy was doing great. And now she has plans to fix the economy. She told us that the border was secure. Now she has plans to fix the border as she's running for president. She told us that the world stage, we're in good shape. Now there's all kinds of foreign policy advice she's going to be giving, and we're on the verge of freaking World War III. I don't give a damn what anybody says. So all these things so basically, like her vice president that she picked, uh, Waltz out of Minnesota, they're habitual liars. She lied to the American people, and so now all of a sudden, all these things are a problem. Of course, many of which are still blaming Donald Trump for, and it's just unbelievable that she did not invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, why don't you go ahead and tell us more about the 25th Amendment, Suzette, because I think this is an interesting part of this.
Yes. So whenever, so I mean, it's really pretty straightforward. When the
Mhm.
president can't do his job, the vice president, it becomes her responsibility to notify um, the Congress that he be removed. And I believe she needs a majority vote to do that. And they can remove him. Now, they can remove him permanently, or they can remove him temporarily, like a lot of presidents when they've needed surgery or they, something like that. I think
Correct.
George Bush had Dick Cheney in charge, for a couple hours, a couple times. So there's that option, so that while they're under anesthesia, something horrible doesn't happen.
Sure.
But when you have somebody that is unable to perform their duties for whatever reason, doesn't matter why,
Hmm.
illness, drug addiction, whatever the issue is, they can be removed, and the vice president becomes the president, and then the House. I'm pretty sure it's the Senate. It's
Well, it's
the
actually the cabinet, I believe. The cabinet, when they talk about the officers of the executive branch, they're really talking about the cabinet. So she needs to get 50% plus one of the
yeah.
cabinet to enact this. Now, I think the issue you're making here is she did not go through this at all, most likely knowing that she was going to be the one selected to be the nominee without one vote from the American people.
Well, yes, and what's interesting about that? Why didn't she want that?
What do you think?
Why didn't she want to take her responsibilities seriously, do not what she wanted to do, but what she had to do? That's what professional people do. They don't
Well,
just,
look, she's
you
only
know,
professional because she gets paid. Okay. And if you look at her career, she has not done anything that did not benefit her. Okay.
she
Starting in San Francisco. Okay.
I
Um,
would
yeah.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, no, what I'm saying is that we know darn well she knew she was going to be the nominee. This was all crafted. She was going to be the nominee for president once they knocked Biden out. And this is something I try to tell my liberal friends that, 14 million people voted for Joe Biden. As much as I have a disdain for the man and for his policies, okay, 14 million Americans voted in the primaries to elect Joe Biden their nominee. Okay. Then overnight, the Democratic Party, boom, he's gone. He's ill. He all of a sudden, overnight after that debate, they all saw the light that Joe Biden, despite the 18 times he fell and lost his way on stage and lost his memory on his speeches and all that, all of a sudden, the night of the debate, they all came to the conclusion he cannot no longer serve as president, which is amazing because he's still there now. Right now, this podcast is being recorded on October 4th of 2024. He's still in the seat as the world is blowing up, by the way, literally. And and she knew darn well what was going to happen, and it was not in her best interest to invoke the 25th Amendment simply because there probably would have been a primary process where she would have gotten less than 1% of the vote, just like she did last time. Okay.
Well, she would have, well,
There's your
and
answer. There's your answer.
what the Constitution says is that she becomes the president.
Hmm.
The because she addresses the Senate and the Congress, and the cabinet and the vice president agree that the president cannot
Right.
fulfill his duties. So she now becomes the president. That would have given her, if she had done this when she realized that he wasn't well, and I think what happened, the only thing I would say differently about your summation is it wasn't that the newscasters saw for the first time that the president was on how sick he was. It's that we all did. There was no way
We
that
already knew it though. Yeah, we already knew it.
we did,
You
but
know.
even Democrats, the people that were like all Biden Harris, were had to face that. And they started treating him like he's grandpa. Well, you wouldn't get rid of grandpa. Well, he's not grandpa. He's the president of the United States, and he's stumbling us into war, another war. I mean, a lot of Americans still think that we are the most powerful military organization or country with the most powerful military. And after all of these decades of these incessant wars, we're just not. I mean, the recruiting
Well,
was down.
I think the deal with her, Suzette, would have been okay. She didn't want to become president for just 4 months because she knew there would be, if she was the president, there most likely would have been a primary where she would have to run against other players. She was installed, so she knew that. And the only way that she didn't want to become president for 4 months. She wants to become president for 4 years. And the only way she could have been, quote unquote, I'm using this term very loosely, nominated is by not enacting the 25th Amendment and just being placed into the position once they knocked Biden out. That's why I think she did it.
I think you're right. And she may have been planning on doing that after the election if he won. So
Well,
that she
she had no snowball's chance in hell of getting elected in any legitimate primary. No way
yeah,
in the world.
she's never won an election, and as a criminal attorney I was listening to was saying that she's never won a case in court where she was the lead attorney.
Right.
She was
Right.
the district attorney of
Right.
San Francisco. Cases were won not by her.
Yeah. Well, I think what are we saying here, Suzette? We're basically saying how corrupt this government is. And when I ran for Congress, and you heard me say this because you were in my district, and that's how I met you. I would tell people in my district when I would talk to them, and I had 135 meet and greets over the course of 5 months. Okay. We worked our butts off. And you live in the biggest congressional district in the country, by the way, Suzette, up in the second district, 63,000 square miles, where just to give you an idea, Pennsylvania is 45,000 square miles. That's how big that district is. Okay. So I would tell people though, don't make the mistake that these people care about you. Some do, guys like Paul Gosar, who we had on the show. I think Andy Biggs. I think Eli Crane, the guy who beat me for Congress, who I think is doing a great job. I think he cares. But I just got out of a meeting, a fundraiser. I went to New York City this week, and I met Steve Scalise, who's a majority leader, and I met Elise Stefanik from New York. And the whole game there is how we can get our party, keep power in with our party. And it matters not who the character of the players that were getting into these roles, as long as they have an R by their name. Okay. And Scalise made the statement, we got some members of Congress, he didn't name any names, but I know who he's talking about. We got some members of Congress that want to take out our quarterback, which is Mike Johnson, who I also met a few weeks ago. And I know who those people are. It's Eli Crane. It's Gates from Florida. It's MTG, who I also met, Marjorie Taylor Greene. These people are saying, wait a minute, you're not doing the thing for the people. You're not following the Constitution. These policies, these laws you're passing, they're unconstitutional. And they're the ones, and Paul Gosar, And Andy Biggs, we got three really good congressmen here in Arizona. Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, and Eli Crane, who's a freshman. And I just saw Eli the other night, and he's doing great. And, I think Ciscomani is a rhino. Quite frankly, I'm not a big fan of his. And we all know Schweiker is been bought out somehow, and he's no longer part of the Freedom Caucus. So if you're not part of the Freedom Caucus, there's a problem there, right?
Right.
So, so we have three really great congressmen here in this state, thank God. But when you look at this, there's only a handful that are pushing back against all this unconstitutionality. And when I listen to Steve Scalise, as much as I respect him, he was more concerned about getting Republicans elected than he was about the quality of the Republicans that we're electing. So what are we going to do? I challenged Schweikert directly when he said he complained about the budget, the debt that we have, and the $1.2 trillion of interest payments. And in front of 300 people, I asked him, well, wasn't it you that voted to increase the debt ceiling? And he got really upset with me when I asked that question, and so, you know, what are we doing here? It's almost like we want the power, but we don't know what the hell to do with it once we get it. I look at it as you got the proverbial dog chasing the car down the street, and once he clamps onto the chrome bumper, then the dog says to himself, "Well, okay, now what do I do? I got the bumper. What do I do with this car now?" Okay, that's the same thing with the Republicans. I'm sorry, and there's only a few fighters, I think, in Congress right now. Very few.
Very
Um,
few, or we wouldn't be where we are. Now, consider this, to get back to the vice president. And I totally appreciate what you're saying, because it is so much that happens is unconstitutional, and people, are thinking, oh, we need a new constitution. It doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be reread,
it needs to be followed.
and
Yes.
exactly, read the Constitution, read the amendments, read the Declaration, understand what it means for all of us. Because I'll tell you this, it's the reason it became so popular, and the idea of individual freedom, rights, and responsibilities became so popular around the world, was because up until the founders and the revolutionaries, the terrorists that were in my family that fought in the American Revolution, they wanted to be free. This was a revolutionary idea. People were, I have people, my neighbor and I were talking about this, and no, your rights come from the government. I
No
said,
boy.
no, they're inalienable, meaning you have it in you. You don't have the government, you don't get the right to speak because the government tells you can. You speak. You have
Well, yeah,
a
you're right.
trust. There's a brain trust of great Americans that we'll never hear from, because they're afraid to speak, because this is, when that goes, it's over. How many people really got up in arms about um, people that have spoken out, the whistleblowers? We had a whistleblower law for a long time, not anymore. It might be there, but these whistleblowers oftentimes are attacked and punished, imprisoned, threatened.
Hmm.
It's awful.
Bankrupt. Bankrupt. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. If Trump weren't a billionaire, he never would have made it through with
Right.
all of these false accusations and false accounts. I've often said to people, do you really think if all these things that are said about President Trump since the Mueller investigation, and since Robert Mueller reported to Congress on the Mueller investigation, $42 million over 100 attorneys and tons of investigators, and the Me Too movement thriving during that time, don't you think if all these women had been assaulted by President Trump, they would have come forward then?
Hey, look, you tell a lie enough, it will become the truth. That's what Vladimir Lenin said. A lie told often enough becomes the truth. And that's what they're still talking about, Russian collusion. Okay. They're still talking about that, what's been disproven beyond
I don't even want to say her name. The woman that paid to have that opposition research, Hillary Rodham Clinton, paid for that oppo research
yes, you
on
did.
Trump. It was totally fabricated by a guy named Steele. They called it the
That's right.
Steele dossier.
Hmm.
This is proved. And
Hmm.
that woman was just on television recently talking about how we shouldn't have free speech in this country because there's so much misinformation. She like is the queen of misinformation,
Well,
which of
you know
course
what's interesting. You know what's interesting. I mean, we have defamation laws, okay, which are really hard to prove defamation because you have to prove damages. But and when you're a public office, public in the public opinion, like a politician, if you're in the public sphere, if you will, there's a different level of standards that you have to meet. It's very hard to prove defamation. However, uh, when you look at all of the things that are going on with free speech and your neighbor saying, hey, the government gives you your rights, which means he was just miseducated. And there are teachers, his teachers probably were miseducated. Um, the Constitution, we talked about this in one of the very early episodes, is designed to prevent the government from infringing on our rights. If you look at the first 10 amendments, which is the Bill of Rights, I think 7 or 8 of them say, shall not, you shall not, uh, the government shall not impede on your right to bear arms. Shall not, shall not, shall not. Okay, so it is a document that protects our rights. It does not grant rights. And I'll never forget one of the episodes we talked about was John, it was nullification. I forget which, it's an earlier episode I did. I don't think with you. I think I did that with Christy.
Christy. Yeah.
And it was the first time that nullification was enacted by Thomas Jefferson and Madison, who were in Virginia and Kentucky at the time as governors. John Adams had the Alien Sedition Act, which part of it which said you can jail somebody for criticizing the government. Okay, that was the Alien Sedition Act, one of the provisions of it. And Jefferson says, nope, that's not constitutional. We ain't doing that. And we have a right to nullify. Matter of fact, we don't have a right to nullify. We have an obligation to
Yeah.
nullify that law. Okay, so we talked about the whole thing about how that all went down. And if you heard Kamala the other day with Elon Musk, she she described his right to free speech as a privilege. Okay.
Well,
And
she's
that,
a communist, so you have to always consider the source.
right.
Marxist, communist. I mean, I was listening to, I think it was either Ed Griffin or Ron Paul talking about there are two forms of government. There's a constitutional republic, and then on this side, you have communists, Marxists, progressives, all these other
Socialist. Yep.
people,
The whole thing.
socialism. They're all kind of the same. They would come under,
Mhm.
it was Ed Griffin, they would come under the category of collectivism.
Collectivism. Yeah. Which Ayn Rand identified in Atlas Shrugged. Well, you think about when she said it was a privilege, that denotes the fact that Elon Musk is given the right to have
Yeah.
free speech. Okay, and that's how these people use these words. Anyway, I think on this 25th Amendment, here's a question for you, Suzette. If you're the
Okay.
vice president,
Yes.
do you think? Well, maybe I'll ask it this way: do you think the vice president with this whole Biden situation it was mental impairment, which you don't need to have any kind of medical? I know you have a medical background, but let's say I don't. My initials are MD, by the way, but that's about it. Okay. Anybody I think could see that he's impaired. Okay. Whether it's dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's, which is a form of dementia, who the heck knows what he has? He's got something.
Since whatever
Okay.
it
Right.
is.
Whatever it could be. Okay. Do you think the vice president, A, had an obligation to enact the 25th Amendment? And B, if if she didn't do it, was she putting herself ahead of the country?
Yes, it's the law. It was her obligation to initiate the
Yep.
removal of the president.
Mhm.
period. It was her obligation to do so.
Mhm.
And yes, and secondly, I don't know if she was putting she obviously was putting her personal position, or she's a sock puppet and she's doing what she's told. So which
Mhm.
so we have a vice president who has a very sketchy history of performance at all levels, everything she's ever done. I mean, there are people that say the woman's never worked a day in her life. She can't keep her staff.
Right.
Her staff, I think she has like a 92%. Is that
Yeah, it's high. It's high. Yeah,
92%?
that's right.
Nobody would. If I was raised in Frederick, Maryland, okay, getting a job at the White House is a big deal. When you work at the White House, you do work 24/7. These are people that plan on, like, that's what they do while they're working at the White House. This is a coveted position. It puts you on the inner circle. You can leave the White House and do almost anything. You see people doing almost anything.
Right.
I mean, you perform well on the White House staff. That's like, talk about a ticket to success. She has a turnover of 92% because she's such a nut. I mean, she's just incompetent. And there are people that are desperate to get ahead that can't stomach it. So that tells us all something. So I think she was one of these people. What she's sharing with us is that she did put pretty much anyone and anything ahead of the country
The
and her
country. Yeah.
responsibility and her obligation to the United States Constitution. It
Mhm.
is, in fact, the law. It's not, if the president and the vice president don't follow the law, what does that say to everyone
By the way,
else?
that's one of their enumerated powers from the Constitution is that they have to enforce the law. That's why the judicial branch falls under the Justice Department falls under them. By the way, I will disagree with you on one thing. Okay.
What's that?
And I know you just had a birthday, so you're getting up there in age. Okay. Suzette, by the way, Suzette is only what, a couple months older than me. But
Yes,
so I know you're my elder. Okay.
thank
But
you.
uh,
And I would like to have the respect that goes along with that.
respect is earned. But no, here's where I disagree. I don't think when we say, oh, Kamala's incompetent and Biden is incompetent and this guy's incompetent, you and I have been talking about this republic, not our democracy, but a republic for a lot of time since we know each other, and we have all these different episodes and all that, and we've also been talking about the overarching assault on our company from a Marxist perspective, from a globalist
Our
Marxist
country,
perspective, right?
our
Exactly,
country,
on
not
our
our.
on our country and to tear down capitalism, to tear
Yes.
down the fabrics of what makes this country great, which is our Constitution, right? And we go into these reasons and these different episodes as to how that all works. Once you understand the overarching framework, then all these crazy laws and things that these people do make total 100% sense. It makes sense. Because people say, how can they pass a law that does that? And how can they understand the overarching goals of what these people are trying to do? They're trying to tear down the fabric of this country. And and so I want to end that little part of this to say, I don't think they're incompetent. I think they're extremely competent. Biden, too, by the way, he's a great shill for, oh, look how incompetent our government is. That's what they want you to think. They want you to think they're incompetent. They want you to think that Kamala isn't smart. I think she's brilliant. I think she's really smart. And she's playing a role. Okay. And hey, look, somebody
But
who's dumb is the vice president. I don't know. You got to be pretty smart to get into that position. I don't care who you are. Okay.
when I,
So
let me clarify something, Mark, and
evil though. Evil
bringing,
though.
thank you for making this point, because what you're
Yep.
saying is critical. When I say they're incompetent, what I mean is they're incompetent with regard to the constitutional
I'm
duties
with you on that. Yeah, I knew that. Yep.
that they are. You don't get, this isn't a, like, kind of show up and do what you want kind of position.
Right.
And the abuse of power, isn't that the saying? The abuse of power corrupts absolutely, or the absolute.
Well, they're very competent at abridging our rights and doing the wrong thing. They're very competent at dismantling this thing we call the American experiment. Right. Right. That's
Yes. And I think like, let's leave it there. I try to, because there's so much we could get into, especially with like something as powerful as the War Powers Act. This is something that
Oh,
should.
we're going to talk about that in the next episode, young lady. Okay.
Perfect. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
We're going to
Because
talk about in the next episode. The next episode we're going to do, episode 34, is going to be, I think I called it something like, instead of checks and balances, I called it the unbalanced and unchecked, because we have written a lot of laws that abridge our fundamental constitutional rights. We legislated unconstitutionality, and I'm going to go through a bunch of examples to show people that in the next episode. Glad you brought that up.
great. Well, Mark, thanks. I hope, this was kind of, it's kind of difficult for me to talk about these things sometimes when they're happening right in real time.
Oh, I know.
You
Mm.
understand what's supposed to happen and you see what is happening. And that all
No.
these players, all the media, a few people with big megaphones, and I think those megaphones are getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. I don't know that many people are actually listening to the mainstream media anymore. I think most people are kind of tuned to new media because they know when they're being lied to. Some
Hey, by the way,
people,
it sounds like your neighbor isn't, though.
oh, he thinks he knows.
Well, yeah, we'll leave it at that, Suzette. But remember, when it comes to the Communist Manifesto, one of the 10 tenets is control the communications.
Yep.
Okay,
Well,
and they're doing a great job at that. They're not incompetent there. I'm sorry, they're
no,
phenomenal.
they're not incompetent, but they
Yeah.
are. But I would say they are treasonous when it comes to
Yeah.
Constitution.
Exactly.
Unbelievable that these guys show up broke and walk away with, 12, $16 million mansions. Like, what's that? Is that bribery?
Oh, come on, Suzette, give me a break. They're really good investors. Okay. They know how to take a $170,000 salary and turn it into $5 million. So please, I mean, these are the most brilliant people in the country. Come on, they got to be the most brilliant. They're leading our country. Give me a break.
On that note, we'll leave you to ponder the role of the vice president, according to
Suzette,
the
this was a great job. You did a nice job outlining what this position is supposed to be. And I know we kind of deviated in a lot of different spaces here, trying to bring it into today's thinking and what's going on today. But yeah, I think it was good. Hopefully, our listeners would understand what this role is all about. The vice president also gets other assignments from the president, which is fine. But these are the constitutionally mandated responsibilities, and the fact that the 25th Amendment was not enacted by this vice president, to me, is grounds for impeachment. But
and it does disqualify her for
right.
anything because she's a liar. I mean, like a serious liar. This is like not a little white lie,
No.
like
No,
this
it puts all of us at risk. It puts all of us at risk.
Look at what's happening, and look what's happening in other countries where these wars are like rolling along, and how many hundreds of thousands of people have been killed unnecessarily because of the refusal of the president and the vice president to fulfill their responsibility, their constitutional responsibility to the people of the United States.
That's right. That's right. All right. We'll leave it at that. This was episode 33, the role of the vice president in, their constitutional responsibilities. Suzette, great job. I'm going to see you on the next episode, and we'll catch you all soon. Thanks for listening to the Constitution Solution, one podcast under God, where we hold that strict adherence to the Constitution is the solution to most of our country's problems.
You can find other episodes on our website at 1787solution.com, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other platforms. We're your hosts, Mark DeLuzio and Suzette Lawrence. Until next time, may God bless you and may God bless America.